All right, guys, we've got an eye-opening video today because we're going to be diving into the impact that teams have on building large Rev Share organizations at brokerages like EXP Realty, Real Broker Epique Realty, and LPT Realty. This isn't something that I hear talked about hardly at all, but it has a massive impact on these Rev Share organizations. So we're going to go in detail today into what kind of impact teams have on your ability to earn Rev Share. If you're thinking about building a large Rev Share organization at any one of these brokerages, this is going to be a must-watch video so you know how attracting teams is ultimately going to impact the amount of Rev Share you're earning. I'm excited to go into this with you, and we're jumping into it right now. Hey everybody, welcome back. Thanks for tuning in. My name is Mark Ames with Elevated Agents, and I'm excited to have you here today as we talk about this very important yet never really talked about topic of how teams impact Rev Share at the various cloud-based brokerages. You know, I've even done a video recently where I compared all four of these brokerages, apples to apples, and I tried to take as many real-world assumptions into account when I was building the models to be able to compare these. And even I did not think to add this in, which is what impact do teams have? Now, if you're not familiar, why do teams impact Rev Share? We're going to go into that right now. So generally, most of the brokerages that we're going to be discussing today have options for reduced caps for agents who are a part of official teams. Now, most of these brokerages have different size teams based off of number of agents and either volume or transaction count. And most of them is generally two sizes, what I'll call standard and what I'll call a mega team. Now, based on the size of the team, you can be eligible for a reduced cap off the standard cap that the brokerage offers. So let's say, for instance, you're at a brokerage that has a $16,000 cap and you're on a team that gives you a half cap option. Well, now your cap is $8,000. If you're on a large enough team, you may be able to get down to a quarter cap, which would be a $4,000 cap option. Now, a lot of people might wonder, well, why doesn't everyone just go out and join a team at these brokerages and that way they can all just have a lower cap? Well, in order to disincentivize agents from doing that, these brokerages generally require a mandatory minimum split that the team leader has to charge all the agents on the team, such that it's a little bit of a disincentive for you to just join a team for the lower cap because you still have to pay a minimum mandatory amount to the team leader on every transaction. So that's how they disincentivize this. But when we think about it, since Rev Share is based off of a percentage of the revenue that's brought in up to an agent's cap, the lower the agent's cap is, the less money there is to contribute to the Rev Share pool. So if you're at a brokerage that offers half cap and quarter cap options, your Rev Share per agent is going to get decreased by anywhere between 50 and 75% based off of what kind of team those individuals are on. So we're going to look today at what kind of impact that huge reduction in potential Rev Share has on how much you can actually make at each of these brokerages. Now, I want to start first with EXP's model. We're going to go through EXP's team overview really quickly so you can see what kinds of teams they have and what the requirements are. So EXP has two main types of teams that have a reduced cap option. The first is a standard team, has to be at least 2 agents, and they have to have done at least $6 million or 30 transactions in the previous 12 months. And when you do that, you're eligible for a half cap, which is $8,000. EXP standard cap is 16, half cap would be 8. So the max Rev Share available for an agent that's on a standard team is going to be 50% or $4,000. Now, the mandatory minimum split that team leader has to charge you for an arm's length transaction is 25%. So again, pretty big disincentive. If you're an agent who doesn't really need to be on a team and you're only trying to do it for the reduced cap, you got to pay a minimum of a 25% split to the team for your transactions. One other thing to consider is that if you're a high producing agent and you want to join a team and you also want to be an icon agent, you cannot be on that reduced cap option and still be an icon agent. So if you want to be on a team and you still want to icon, you cannot take that reduced cap option. And that's true for both of these teams. The next kind of team they have is called a mega icon team. This needs to be at least 11 agents with 40 million or 175 transactions in order to start that team. The cap for that is a quarter cap, so $4,000. So the max Rev Share available for someone that's on a mega icon team is only $2,000 at EXP. Same 25% minimum split. And again, you cannot icon if you're on one of those reduced splits. All right, so now let's take a look at Real's team overview. I'm not sure of the exact name that Real uses to differentiate their two kinds of teams. They're called pro teams, but I don't know between the two what they're called. So we're going to call them standard and mega. If you're a Real agent, let me know what they should be called and I'll update it next time. So a standard team at Real, 2+ agents or $5 million or 25 transactions in the previous 12 months. The cap is $6,000 and therefore the max rev share available is $6,000 with a 60% buffer of the revenue per month. So the way this works at Real is if the amount of rev share that was generated and is supposed to get paid out in a given month is more than 60% of Real's revenue, they're going to figure out the percentage that they owe you. They're going to decrease the total revenue share down to 60% of their revenue, and then they'll pay you out a lesser amount than what you were entitled to, just to make sure that they stay profitable. And that's called a buffer. They also have a 10% minimum split that the team leader has to charge you. Now, their mega team, 12+ agents or $100+ million in production, then the cap goes down to $4,000. So max rev share available, $4,000 with a 60% buffer and the same 10% minimum split. All right, so now when we jump over to Epique, we can see they have two types of teams as well, traditional teams and power teams. Their traditional team needs to be 2+ agents with the team leader being on a $15,000 cap. The cap then drops down to $10,000 and the percentage of rev share available is 50% or $5,000, and they have a minimum split of 5%. Their power team, you have to do $40 million or 140 transactions. The cap then goes down to $5,000, so the max rev share available there would be $2,500 with the same 5% minimum split. And lastly, when we look at LPT's teams, we can see we don't have any charts here because LPT does not have any type of official team structures that we have outlined as a brokerage. And so we look at agent choice. The way that it works at LPT Realty is every single agent, regardless of whether they want to be on a team or not, has the option to choose which comp plan they're going to be on. There's two different comp plans. There's an 80-20 split with a $15,000 cap called a brokerage partner, and there's a $500 flat fee with a $5,000 cap that's called a business builder. Every agent, when they join LPT Realty, has the option to choose which plan they're going to go on. And it doesn't matter whether you're on a team or not on a team, with the one exception that if you're going to start a team, you do have to be a brokerage partner and be on the 80-20 split with a $15,000 cap. However, every single agent that's on your team can be on whatever comp plan they want to be. So most of them are probably going to be on the flat fee $5,000. And then you'll also have some that are going to be on the 80-20 brokerage partner plan, just based on what's best for their business. So because of that, the only team requirement that LPT has is that the team leader's on the $15,000 cap option as a brokerage partner. The cap is going to be the agent's choice. And then the percentage of rev share available is 50%. So it's either going to be $7,500 or $2,500 based on which comp plan they're on. And there is no minimum split whatsoever. Because all the agents at LPT have a choice about what comp plan they want to be on, regardless of whether or not they're on a team, there's no reason for LPT as a brokerage to incentivize or disincentivize agents from being on or not being on a team. So if you're the team leader, you have 100% control on how you want to run that team and what type of splits you want to offer. Now, when we look at a sample rev share organization, and I am not going to go into detail in this particular video about how we came up with these numbers. I did a really long detailed video that I'm going to link up here in the corner as well as at the end of this video. If you want to see the math behind where all of these numbers came from, check that video out because I go through a lot of detail about how I came up with this model. It's all mathematically based off of a few assumptions that you can see here on the screen. But the one assumption I left off of this was reduced caps from team members. So that's what we're going to be exploring today. So as we look at these kind of sample rev share organizations and how many agents you can have after a certain period of time based off of those assumptions, this is the total number of agents that you would be looking at in a 5-tier system like Real or Epique. And then in a 7-tier system like EXP or LPT, these would be the total agent counts roughly that you would be looking at if it grew in accordance with the assumptions that we made. Now, one other thing we want to take into account is the rev share calculators that you see out there generally assume that all of the agents that are in your downline are going to cap, and that simply does not happen. And so I've gone through the math here. Again, I'm not going to go through this in detail because we've done this before, but basically our assumption is that on average, you're going to be receiving 43.75% of the available rev share per agent per tier. Now, one adjustment that I've made in this video is for the individual agents that are not on teams, we're still assuming the same 43.75%. However, for agents that are on teams, I'm going to bump that up almost 40% to where it's 60% of the potential revenue share that you're actually going to earn, because what we do find is that agents that are on teams, generally speaking, do tend to do more deals, which means they're more likely to actually hit their cap, which means the percentage of rev share that you're going to be getting is higher, even though the total dollar amount that's available is lower. All right, and so this is the average revenue share per tier per agent that you would expect to see based off of the assumptions that we just made. And this is going to be for agents that are not on teams. Now, one thing I do want to bring up is that I made a mistake in the last video that I want to correct. And the mistake that I made was that I didn't take into account the decreasing cap that Epique Realty has when it comes to their long-term rev share opportunity. So I basically kept it constant the entire time, where you were making that full $7,500 max potential per agent the entire time. However, at Epique Realty, their cap does decrease by $1,000 a year from $15,000 ultimately down to $10,000. Now, when that happens, the amount of available rev share per agent drops from $7,500 to $5,000. And I didn't take that into account, frankly, because it was a tremendous amount of math to figure it out. But I went ahead and ran the numbers. I took the same number of agents and then the 20% reduction. I was able to calculate just how many agents per year had a certain amount of tenure and what cap they would have been on. So I was able to get very, very accurate numbers. And this is what that distribution looked like in terms of how many agents have been there a certain number of years over time. So you can see that in year one, obviously 100% of the agents you brought on are going to be on a $15,000 cap. So you have the full $7,500 available. But then by year 10, you can see it's a much different distribution. So this is what that looks like at Epique. Estimated after 10 years, you'd have about a quarter that are on the full $7,500 rev share contribution, and about 20% that are on the $5,000. So this is what that looks like. Over time, it shifts more and more to the lower paying tiers, but this is what that looked like after 10 years. All right, so now that we have all of that out of the way, we can start taking a look at the actual total dollars that you can earn at each of these brokerages with and without teams. So we're going to start with Epique. And we're going to look at the impact, first of all, of their decreasing cap over time. This is just the impact of the cap decreasing from 15,000 to 10,000. So in the scenario where the cap stays at 15,000, the total would have been 5.7 million over the 10 years. However, when you factor in that decreasing cap, you lost about $600,000 over those 10 years. And now you're at 5.1 million over the 10 years. When we jump to EXP Realty, $5.6 million over the 10 years. We go to Real Broker, $5.6 million over the 10 years. And LPT Realty, they're at $6.6 million over the 10 years. Again, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this. If you want to see where these came from, watch the other video and we'll go into a lot more detail. So when you compare all of those over the 10-year total earnings, this is what that looks like. And again, this is without any team. So you got Epique at 5.1, at 5.2, Real and EXP at 5.6, LPT at 6.6. But let's start factoring in what happens when we start adding members on teams. Now, according to NAR, about 30% of real estate agents that are members of NAR are on a real estate team based off of their most recent polls. So what I have also learned is that the number of people that are on teams at these cloud-based brokerages tends to be substantially higher than a lot of other brokerages. And a lot of that does have to do with these reduced cap opportunities, but generally just the way these organizations grow. And by being a cloud-based brokerage, teams are somewhat able to step in and fill some of the gaps that get created when you go from a brick and mortar brokerage to a cloud-based brokerage where you don't have those brick and mortar locations. And so what you'll find is that a higher percentage of teams than average are on teams at these cloud-based brokerages because it does kind of recreate some of the things that people like about brick and mortar brokerages. So what we're going to do first is we're going to look at just what NAR standard is, which is 30% of the agents being on teams. How we're going to break this down is we're going to assume that 5% of the agents are going to be on the standard team, the smaller teams, and 25% of the agents are going to be on mega teams. Now that doesn't, this means that you could have a lot more standard teams, but the total number of agents, the percentage of agents that are on the mega teams is just going to be higher because this is where you've got a lot of your 20, 30, 50, 75, 100 person teams that are really going to start to fill up your organization. Because what I'll tell you is that if you're looking to build a large rev share organization at any one of these brokerages, teams are going to have to play a large role in it. I'm not saying that you can't build a 500 person or 1,000 person downline, one agent at a time, But ultimately, over time, what's going to happen is you're going to bring on a team of 10, and that team leader happens to know other team leaders, and they bring on a team of 30, and that guy happens to know this girl who has a team of 50. And then ultimately, a lot of teams end up in your organization as a result of team leaders know other team leaders, and that's how these organizations can grow very quickly, is when you start attracting a lot of teams. So these are the assumptions that we're going to make. Again, standard agents are getting 43.75% of the total commission, and agents on teams are getting 60. These are the assumptions we're going to use. Let's look at the dollars. So first of all, Epique. We started with 5.1 million with no teams. However, that dropped down by 360,000 to 4.7 million just by adding the NAR standard 30% team model right here. When we go to EXP, they started at 5.6. They end at 4.9 for a loss of about $732,000 over those 10 years, with 30% of the agents being on teams. Real Broker started at 5.6 million. They're down to 4.7 million, a loss of almost $900,000 in Rev Share at Real Broker as a result of 30% of the agents being on teams. I want to say one thing about Real very quickly, in that I think these numbers may be a little bit exaggerated from the standpoint of their threshold to join that mega team and have a $4,000 cap is higher at $100 million than the other brokerages. So my suspicion is there are probably a smaller number of agents at Real that are on that brokerage. There's probably a larger number of agents that are on the $6,000 cap than what I'm showing. I think in the end, the numbers probably shake out pretty close to what Epique and EXP have, just based on some of the other things I've seen. So I do want to make that caveat. So if you're at Real, yeah, I understand these might be a little high. I think they're probably closer to what EXPs and Reals are. I just want to make that this as fair as possible. Okay, LPT, 10-year earnings with no teams, $6.6 million. 10-year earnings with 30% teams, $6.6 million. And guys, this is what happens with the brokerage model, where you have agent choice, where every single agent gets to choose automatically, regardless of whether or not they're on a team, what comp plan they want to be on. And so you don't have to be on a team to get the lower cap. And so the assumption that we've made here is that 70% of the entire brokerage is on a reduced cap. Not just 70% of the agents in your downline, 70% of the entire brokerage I have being on that reduced cap. So these are the numbers reflecting that. This is 30% being Rev Share partners or brokerage partners on the 80-20 split, and 70% being business builders on the $5,000 cap. But because that doesn't change whether you are or are not on a team, with the exception of the team leader needing to be a brokerage partner, the Rev Share stays exactly the same. So I want to point out what's probably a more realistic example for a lot of these downlines, which is there's a much higher percentage than 30% of the agents that are actually going to be on teams. And I have individuals in my organization, in my downline, that have 500-person organizations of their own, where 80% of the agents that are in their organization are on teams. And so this is a very realistic example of someone that I know personally, and she has a 500-plus person downline with over 80% of the agents that are in her downline being on teams. So I think it's really important to explore, what does that look like at these different brokerages, because we know this is how a lot of the large Rev Share organizations ultimately build over time. We're going to make a somewhat similar assumption. 5% of the agents are still going to be on a standard team, and 75% of the agents are going to be on mega teams. Again, based on what we've seen and how these things grow, this is pretty realistic. So when we go over to Epique, again, with no teams, we were at $5.1 million. And as soon as we jump up to 80% of the agents that are in our organization being on these teams, we drop down to $3.2 million for a loss of almost $1.9 million over those 10 years. When we go to EXP, we start at 5.6 million. You put 80% of the agents on teams. Now, again, 80% of the agents and 75% of those agents are on a mega team where the max contribution to the Rev Share pool is only $2,000. So it got cut by 75% if those agents weren't on teams. And when that happens, it dropped down to $3 million for a loss of over $2.5 million over the course of those 10 years at EXP. When we go to Real Broker, and again, these are probably going to be exaggerated, as we talked about last time, based off of not as many agents are going to be on that $4,000 cap as there are the $6,000 cap. It's probably closer to EXP and Epique, but they started at 5.6 million and they're down to $2.5 million when you add 80% of the agents on teams, for a loss of over $3 million in Rev Share. We wrap up with LPT again. 10-year earnings with no teams, $6.6 million. 10-year earnings with 80% of the agents on teams, $6.6 million. There is no change because of how we have it structured with agent choice from the very beginning. So I want to compare this over the three different scenarios. So this is what it looks like with no agents on teams. As you can see, there's not as much difference between them when you factor no agents being on teams. But when we look at those 30% of agents being on teams, which again, NAR standard would be about 30%, a much bigger difference between them. When we go to the 80%, this is where we really start to see a significant impact on the earning potential that you have at these various brokerages that offer reduced caps for agents that are on teams. When you look at the 10-year earnings, again, you can see here 0%, 30%, 80%, really, really big difference when you start getting the 80% teams. Realistically, what I wanted to do is look at, well, what's the average? We know it's more than 30, and for a lot of people, it's probably less than 80. So I average those two together, and this is going to be the average impact over 10 years of teams on your Rev Share organizations because of reduced caps. So again, you can see here, at the top is going to be LPT Realty, which didn't have any change based off of whether agents were on teams or not. 6.6 million, and then about 2.6 million less. Epique comes in at 4, EXP right at 4. Again, very, very close, and Real at 3.6. Again, I'm going to give Real the benefit of the doubt and say they're probably closer to that 4 million. With EXP and Epique. But again, that's a difference of $2.65 million between LPT and the rest and the next closest brokerage. So do teams have a big impact on earning potential at cloud-based brokerages? I think the numbers speak for themselves. So I want you to ask a few questions of yourself if you're thinking about growing one of these organizations, and that is attracting teams going to be a part of your strategy? And I'm going to say that if you want to grow a large Rev Share organization, it has to be. Teams will have to become a large part of your organization just because of how these things grow. Again, you can build these one at a time, but every once in a while, you need to get a team leader on there, even if it's a small team, because they're going to know other team leaders, they know other team leaders, and that's how a lot of these organizations grow. So if attracting teams is going to be a part of your strategy, you need to pay attention to this. But the other question that you need to ask yourself is, how do you retain agents who decide to leave teams? So I want to look at kind of the evolution of an agent who joins one of these brokerages and see what happens over time, because as we talked about in the other video, attrition is a huge killer to your potential downline earnings. And so again, we take an agent who joins a mega team at EXP. They've got a $4,000 cap, which is awesome, but they also have a minimum mandatory split of 25%, and they can't earn icon status on that reduced cap. So as this agent starts to grow and evolve, and they're doing enough deals, whereas a solo agent, they could earn icon status where they're going to get their cap back in stock. And they also are probably going to get tired of paying that minimum 25% split if they're starting to generate a lot of leads on their own and really just aren't getting the same value from the team. Now, there's a lot of value on teams, but agents do leave. And so what happens when that happens? So agent leaves the team, stays at EXP, and now their cap increases by 400%. It quadruples up to $16,000 just because they left the team. Now, they don't have any more minimum split with a team leader, which is great, but your cap just quadrupled. So what ends up happening is these agents go to look for a brokerage that offers the same or better tools and does so at a lower cost to the agent. And that's why we see agent migration. And so that's what you need to pay attention to is, yes, it's great that you have this option to have these reduced caps if you want to be on a team where, again, you're paying a mandatory minimum split. Most of these teams are not charging the minimum split. They're charging something more like 50-50, 60-40, 70-30. And again, depending on the team, that might be a tremendous value to you as the agent. But just keep in mind what happens when you decide to leave a team and what happens when agents who are in your organization decide they're going to leave a team. Are they going to stay at the brokerage, or are they going to go find another brokerage? So for the 80% of agents who aren't going to have any downline whatsoever, because what we know is only about 20% or less of the agents in any of these organizations are going to build a downline. So for the 80% there, again, this is what you can be looking at in terms of dollars and cents comparison between these brokerages. So an agent who joins EXP at LPT will spend an additional $110,000 in additional splits over the 10 years. An agent at Epique will spend an additional $70,000 versus LPT over 10 years. An agent at Real will spend an additional $70,000 in splits over 10 years at LPT, at Real versus LPT. And the cool thing, again, is if you're an agent at LPT and you join as the business builder, that flat fee $5,000 model, you can still build your organization. You can still grow that. You can still go out and attract agents. You just forfeit the Rev Share dollars until you as the agent decide that the amount of Rev Share you're earning is enough to offset the additional cap cap that you're going to take on by switching to a brokerage partner. But as soon as that makes sense for you as the agent, you can make that swap. And now you can start earning all of those rev share dollars that you were building while you weren't paying the higher cap. So this is why I think still when you look at these models in the last video, I didn't really want to declare a winner because I think they were really too close to call. In this scenario, I am definitely going to have to give LPT the advantage when it comes to factoring in agents that are on teams into a rev share organization. It really has a massive impact. So if you're one of those agents who is thinking about building an organization, you've got questions about rev share, I've been doing this long enough, I can hopefully answer most of your questions. Or if you're one of the 80% who just want to come here and sell real estate and have the option to eventually tap in to this extra source of revenue that we make available to you if it's the right fit for you, I would love to connect with you, learn more about you, your business, your goals, see what you're trying to do, see if LPT is going to be the right brokerage and if I might be the right sponsor. Go ahead and click the link down in the description below. You can set up a one-on-one private Zoom call with me. I'd love to connect and learn more. Until then, be well.